with Jimmy Keene, a narcotics dealer. In his high school days, he was a star football player, but his life has drastically changed due to drug dealing. One day, he visits his supplier, Rog, and tells him that the latest batch of drugs he received is less than the agreed amount. Rog assures him that he has never cheated any client and that trust is more valuable to him than his own life. To explain the situation, Rog takes Jimmy to a dark room and reveals the true culprit behind the problem. When the lights come on, Jimmy is shocked to see his childhood friend, Danny, tied to a chair, severely beaten by Rog for betraying their trust. Danny, in tears, explains that he needed money to pay off his debt, which is why he tampered with the supplies. Rog is about to shoot Danny, but Jimmy pleads with him to let him go. To make amends, Jimmy offers Rog an additional 3 kilos of drugs, promising to cover for Danny's mistake. Jimmy, trying to relieve some stress, goes to an expensive restaurant where he meets a beautiful waitress named Rochelle. And well, you can probably guess what happens next. The next morning, while Jimmy is making breakfast for himself, the FBI suddenly raids his house. They find guns and drugs, and he is immediately arrested and sent to jail. In jail, Jimmy's father, Big Jim, a retired cop, comes to visit him. Big Jim is visibly worried about his son and feels responsible for the situation, blaming himself for getting involved in Jimmy's illegal activities. He tells Jimmy that the court could sentence him to a maximum of 5 years in prison. However, FBI agent Edmund Beaumont has offered a deal. If Jimmy confesses to all his crimes in court, his sentence could be reduced to just 2 years. The following day, Jimmy appears in court and admits to his crimes, expecting a lighter sentence as promised. However, instead of receiving the expected reduction, the judge unexpectedly increases his sentence to 10 years. Jimmy is left stunned and deeply troubled by the turn of events. Feeling betrayed, he glances angrily at Edmund Beaumont, questioning why he deceived him. But before he can react further, the security guards step in and take him away.
For the minimum guideline term of 120 months.
Now Jimmy has spent over 7 months in a minimum security prison in Michigan. During this time there, he has used his charm and social skills to build a strong reputation, earning the respect and liking of nearly everyone in the prison. Due to Jimmy's exceptional social skills, FBI agent Lauren McCauley becomes impressed and arranges a meeting to propose a deal. When Jimmy notices Edmund sitting with her, he can't help but question whether another misleading offer is about to be made. Lauren quickly calms him down, urging him to listen carefully. She explains that he has only one chance to use his charismatic personality to his advantage. She goes on to explain that if Jimmy can befriend Larry Hall, a serial killer and child molester currently held in Springfield Maximum Security Prison, and managed to find out the locations of the burial sites where Larry buried his young victims, his sentence will be forgiven. Jimmy questions why the FBI needs his help for this task. Lauren explains that Larry Hall is like a great deceptive actor and often confesses to his crimes in front of the police.
Can I touch her?
Only to later claim innocence through court appeals, which leads to his release. The authorities see him more as an attention-seeking serial confessor rather than a genuine threat. However, Lauren insists that this time it's different. They need someone who can get close to Larry and extract information from him, as he is skilled at covering his tracks and destroying evidence. Jimmy expresses his concerns about the dangerous criminals in Springfield, questioning the wisdom of sending him there. In response, Lauren stresses the urgency of the situation, warning that if nothing is done, Larry Hall could escape and continue preying on innocent girls. She then presents Jimmy with details about Larry Hall before leaving him to think over the proposition. That night, unable to sleep due to his restless thoughts and overthinking, Jimmy begins to closely read through Larry Hall's files. He immerses himself in the details of Larry's case, trying to piece together the complex puzzle of his life. As he delves into the documents, he examines Larry's family background, searching for any clues that might shed light on his motivations and behaviors.
I'm smart. I got ideas.
The next day, Jimmy tells his dad about the new deal from the FBI, which requires him to go undercover in Springfield to uncover secrets about a serial killer. In exchange, they would erase his entire sentence. However, he warns Jimmy about the dangers lurking in Springfield, highlighting the unpredictable nature of undercover work. He expresses his fears that if Jimmy finds himself in further trouble, the consequences could be severe, potentially increasing his sentence instead of reducing it. The next day, Jimmy's stepmother, Sammy Keene, visits him, her face filled with concern. She breaks the heartbreaking news that Big Jim suffered a brain stroke the night before and is now in the hospital, fighting for his life. The stroke was triggered by the stress over Jimmy's situation, as Big Jim feels responsible for what happened. With a shaky voice, Sammy urges Jimmy to seriously think about accepting the FBI's deal, stressing that his father might not have much time left. Her words weigh heavily on Jimmy. This news sparks a fierce determination in him to head to Springfield, not only to help crack the case but also to make his father proud. The scene shifts to September 10, 1993, 4 years earlier, marking the beginning of Larry Hall's crimes. FBI agent Brian Miller arrives to investigate the murder of a 15-year-old girl named Jessica Roach. At the scene, a witness mentions seeing a van making repeated trips to the area, but he can't recall the color of the van or who was driving it. Additionally, Brian notices Jessica's folded clothes and accessories, which are impeccably clean, making it difficult to gather any evidence from them. 13 months later, in October 1994, Brian receives information about another rape and murder case involving a college girl named Trisha Reitler. Utilizing all his resources, he uncovers that the van seen at the crime scene belonged to Larry Hall. He immediately calls his colleague, Chris Drysdale, to gather all available information on Hall. Chris informs him that he knows Larry's family, who runs a grave digging business. He adds that while Larry is mentally challenged, he could never be a killer. However, Brian insists on meeting Larry and instructs Chris to take him into custody right away.
With your help, we'd like to talk to him.
The next day, Brian travels to Indiana to interview Larry. Chris informs him that they have taken Larry into custody. When Brian approaches Larry, Chris's colleagues try to stop him, warning that interviewing Larry will yield no results, as he is merely an attention-seeking serial confessor who only admits to crimes in front of the police for the attention it brings him. However, Brian insists that he wants to see for himself. When Brian finally sees Larry, he is confused by his unusual appearance. Noticing Larry's sideburns, Brian comments on how odd they look. Larry responds that he styled them that way for a Civil War reenactment, insisting that they should be called burns instead of sideburns. Brian chooses to ignore this and starts asking him random questions. Gradually, Brian begins to ask Larry about his preferences regarding girls. Larry replies that he hates girls because none of them will talk to him. He adds that he often has dreams where he is killing girls, but insists that these are just dreams and have no connection to reality. Brian is taken aback by this response and then places a picture of Jessica Roach in front of him.
Okay, is she Larry?
Asking if he recognizes her. Upon seeing the photo, Larry starts to tremble and tells Brian to take it away from him. Shortly after, Larry begins to have convulsions, prompting the investigators to let him go. Witnessing all of this only deepens Brian's suspicions about Larry. Brian then goes to meet with Lauren and Edmund Beaumont, presenting the entire case against Larry. They decide to summon Larry to the FBI's central facility in Illinois for further investigation. During the session, the FBI agent attempts to understand his psyche by asking why he is specifically attracted to young girls. Larry responds that he finds them hard to resist because they are often sweet and easy to talk to. The agent then asks Larry why he experiences dreams of murder and whether they keep him from sleeping at night. Larry admits that he has the same nightmares every night, which prevents him from getting a good night's sleep. The agent then places a picture of Jessica Roach in front of him. As Larry trembles, he picks up the photo and confesses that he knows her, admitting that he was the one who killed her. Lauren and Brian listen as Larry makes his confession.
I do remember where it was exactly.
And they quickly prepare a report for him to sign. Agent suggests that signing the document might finally put an end to his nightmares, so Larry agrees and signs it. As a result of his murder confession, Larry is sent to Springfield. However, this isn't the first time he has been there. He has been to Springfield multiple times before. In the present, Lauren calls Jimmy in to ask for his final decision. He expresses his willingness to go to Springfield. However, Lauren begins to question him, wondering if he is truly capable of handling the situation there. She asks him what he finds appealing about women. Jimmy responds that he finds everything about women appealing and prefers hanging out with girls over boys. Lauren then asks if he has read Larry's files and what he knows about Larry's preferences in women. Jimmy admits he doesn't know. She follows up with another question about the reason for his parents' divorce. Jimmy answers in a sophisticated manner, explaining that there were some differences between his parents that ultimately led to their separation. Lauren becomes frustrated, tossing the files aside and standing up. She tells Jimmy that he will never uncover Larry's secrets with that attitude. Jimmy then admits the truth. His mother was promiscuous and was with different men every day, which ultimately led to his father leaving her. Upon hearing this, Lauren grants him permission to go to Springfield and informs him that he will be transferred there by plane that night. That night, Jimmy is given simple civilian clothes and boards the plane headed for Springfield. During the flight, he uses his charismatic personality to connect with the rest of the FBI crew on board, making friends with everyone. Lauren watches this unfold and is quite impressed by his ability to charm those around him. Lauren calls Jimmy over and informs him that only one psychiatrist, Aaron Zickerman, and a small guarding crew are aware of this undercover mission in Springfield. She assures him that if he encounters any difficulties, he can reach out to them for support. Lauren adds that she will visit him as his girlfriend in a month to help maintain his cover and prevent anyone from becoming suspicious. After landing in Springfield, Lauren wishes Jimmy good luck on his mission. She emphasizes the importance of staying focused and warns him not to make any mistakes. As the FBI crew drives Jimmy to the Springfield jail, they reapply the handcuffs to him with apologies. As they approach the jail, Jimmy begins to feel anxious. At the last moment, he considers changing his decision and expresses that he wants to go back, insisting that he doesn't want to stay in this demonic cell. However, the FBI agents encourage him, reminding him that he's not just doing this for his own freedom but also to stop a demon from escaping the jail, preventing him from committing further atrocities against innocent girls. After hearing this, Jimmy changes his mind and prepares himself to enter the Springfield cell. Now, it is shown that Larry Hall is working as a mechanic in the jail, leveraging his extensive knowledge of engine repairs. The guards often rely on him to fix malfunctioning equipment. Over several days, Jimmy observes Larry's habits closely. He notices that Larry tends to isolate himself and rarely engages in conversation with anyone. Jimmy makes multiple attempts to strike up a conversation, but each time, Larry dismisses him, preferring to remain in silence. Their cells are located right next to each other, allowing Jimmy to study Larry's behavior more closely. On the other side, Lauren and Brian start their investigation at Larry Hall's home. As they enter, they are met by Gary Hall, Larry's twin brother, who looks skeptical and a bit defensive. He tells Brian that he doubts they will find anything important during their search. He firmly believes that his brother isn't a murderer and insists that Larry will soon be released from jail, just like he has been in the past. But Brian calmly replies that only time will reveal the truth about Larry's actions.
Your brother confessed to 2 murders.
Lauren examines Larry's van closely and shares a concerning discovery with Brian. She mentions that they found a bottle full of contraceptive pills alongside cleaning supplies like alcohol and formalin. This unsettling find raises red flags for both Lauren and Brian, suggesting that these items might be used to eliminate evidence of possible crimes. A few days later, Larry's lawyer submits a request for a new hearing in court, leaving Brian and Lauren astonished when the judge accepts Larry's plea. The possibility now looms that Larry might be declared innocent and released in the upcoming hearing. This revelation causes significant concern for both Brian and Lauren, as they realize the stakes are higher than ever. That night, Lauren calls Brian, hoping to ease his worries. She reassures him that there's no need to be anxious since an undercover agent has been assigned to gather information on Larry and uncover his secrets. Despite her calming words, Brian remains deeply troubled.
How do you feel about today? Good?
He says that this approach might not lead to any real results. Frustrated, he abruptly ends the call, unsure of how to proceed. After hanging up, Brian shifts his focus to his daughter, who is quietly playing in the corner of the room. As he watches her, a wave of concern washes over him. He finds himself lost in thought, wondering if he will be able to keep her safe from the monsters of the society. The next day, Lauren meets with Brian and provides him with detailed information about Jimmy's mission. She explains that Jimmy was arrested in a narcotics case but possesses a charismatic personality that allows him to quickly bond with people. Lauren emphasizes that this makes him a valuable asset, as he could extract crucial secrets from Larry that they might never uncover through traditional investigation methods. Brian agrees to give it a shot, though he feels mentally drained. He sarcastically refers to Larry Hall as a master actor, remarking on his ability to commit crimes, confess to them, and then walk free. In response, Lauren hands Brian more of Larry's files, urging him that they need to dig deeper into the case. Meanwhile, in Springfield, Jimmy meets with Dr. Zickerman. The doctor tells him that if he needs anything, he can reach out, but they must keep everything confidential. He adds that Jimmy should only come to see him once a week to avoid raising any suspicion about their undercover activities. Dr. Zickerman prescribes Jimmy antidepressants, but Jimmy insists that he doesn't need the pills and feels perfectly fine. However, the doctor advises him that his mental state may change in a few months, so he should start the medication now. Reluctantly, Jimmy agrees. He then asks the doctor for a number to reach him in case of an emergency. Dr. Zickerman provides his home landline number and tells Jimmy to call only when it's absolutely necessary. At the dining table, Jimmy notices Larry sitting alone, eating while others keep their distance from him. Deciding to approach him, Jimmy makes an effort to bridge the gap. Later, while picking up his medications from the medical store, he again tries to engage Larry by saying hello, but Larry doesn't respond. As he walks back to his cell, Jimmy calls out to Larry, asking why he's so quiet and expressing that he just wants to chat since they are neighbors. However, Larry continues to ignore him and walks away, deepening Jimmy's determination to break through Larry's shell. The next day, Larry is sitting in the common room watching a TV show when suddenly another tough inmate forcefully changes the channel. Observing this, Jimmy sees an opportunity to gain Larry's trust. He stands up and switches the channel back, reclaiming the show for Larry. This act provokes the tough inmate, who starts threatening Jimmy. In a burst of anger, Jimmy retaliates, unleashing a flurry of punches that leaves the inmate bloodied. Before long, security guards arrive, apprehend Jimmy, and throw him into solitary confinement as a consequence of the altercation. After spending an entire night in solitary confinement, Jimmy is returned to his cell. This time, Larry approaches him and asks why he fought the tough inmate on his behalf. Jimmy explains that the inmate was causing trouble, and he couldn't tolerate that kind of behavior. He adds that since they are neighbors, it's only natural to stand up for each other. Larry is impressed by Jimmy's response and decides to introduce himself properly.
Jimmy.
They begin to converse more openly, creating a tentative bond between them. Jimmy senses an opportunity to build trust with Larry, hoping this connection will eventually lead to uncovering more about his secrets. After a while, a security guard approaches Jimmy and informs him that someone is there to see him. Jimmy is a bit confused because family visit days are not scheduled for today. When he goes to the visitation area, he finds his father, Big Jim, waiting for him. Big Jim expresses his concern, stating that he has been worried about Jimmy for many days and rushed over as soon as he found out that Jimmy was in Springfield. Jimmy, puzzled, asks how he managed to get into the jail without a scheduled visit. Big Jim explains to Jimmy that he told the guards he's an ex-cop, which is why they let him in. Jimmy gets really worried when he hears this, realizing how risky that could be. He warns Big Jim that he's there undercover, and if anyone finds out about his father's past, it could make things really dangerous for him. Big Jim feels embarrassed upon hearing this and recognizes that he made a big mistake. He mentions that the stroke has seriously affected his ability to think clearly. He feels responsible for everything happening to Jimmy and begins to feel down about it. However, Jimmy reassures him, saying he shouldn't worry because it's not his fault and that he sees him as a strong figure. He emphasizes that he doesn't need to be so apologetic. Jimmy adds that he's alive today only because of him. Just then, their meeting time runs out, and Jimmy has to leave. He asks the guard, Carter, to keep the information about his father being an ex-cop to himself. Carter assures him that he won't mention it to anyone. Later, Jimmy goes to Larry's cell and notices the pictures pinned on the walls, showing Larry at a Civil War reenactment event with his brother Gary. When Jimmy asks about Gary, Larry explains that Gary is his twin brother. He shares that due to a condition called twin transfusion syndrome, Gary absorbed all the nutrients in the womb, which is why he is now strong, intelligent, and handsome, while Larry feels like a big, overweight guy. In response, Jimmy flatters Larry, telling him that he's quite cute and shouldn't underestimate himself.
Why are you being nice?
Then Larry shows Jimmy his mechanic office, where he repairs the jail's equipment. When Jimmy asks him how he learned all this, Larry explains that he used to frequently work on his van, which is how he gained a lot of knowledge about mechanics. Jimmy gradually steers the conversation toward girls, asking Larry what kind of girls he likes. Larry replies that no girl has ever spoken to him nicely, but then Larry reveals his inner darkness and asks Jimmy inappropriate questions. Jimmy hesitates and replies that it happens to everyone. However, Larry insists that no girl wants to be with him. Jimmy is taken aback and asks if he was forcing himself on them. Larry responds that there shouldn't be any problem with that. Just as Larry begins to provide more details, a guard walks in, and Jimmy can't learn anymore. On the other side, Lauren and Brian are studying the case of another murder force victim, 16-year-old Raina Reeson, which occurred 13 months ago. they discover clear evidence linking Larry Hall to this case, including Raina Reeson's birth control pills being found in Larry Hall's van. However, despite all this, local police had released Larry Hall from the case, declaring him not responsible. To uncover the details of the case, Lauren and Brian visit the sheriff of Indiana to discuss Raina Reeson's case and ask why he released Larry Hall. The sheriff explains that Larry only lies to gain attention from the police. He claims that the real culprit was Raina Reeson's ex-boyfriend, not Larry. The sheriff shows them a picture of the birth control pills and explains that the evidence was not enough to convict Larry. When Raina's blood was tested, it showed no trace of the birth control medication, only other drugs. Because of this lack of evidence, they had no choice but to release Larry. He adds that there is no need to waste time and government's money on Larry's case. Brian and Lauren feel quite demotivated as they sit in the local bar, drowning their frustrations in drinks. Brian bursts with anger, declaring that Larry is the worst kind of brain-rotting psychopath to ever exist on this planet. He confesses to the murders and then manages to prove himself innocent. What a despicable combination of foolishness and cunning. Lauren, trying to stay hopeful amidst the despair, mentions that their last chance lies with Jimmy, who might be the one to uncover the real secrets. In jail, Jimmy encounters Carter, who warns him that if he doesn't give him $10,000, he'll expose Jimmy's undercover status to everyone in the prison and ruin his plan. Jimmy is taken aback by this and asks how he's supposed to come up with that kind of money while in jail. Carter coldly replies that it's not his problem. Jimmy then asks his father for a loan of $10,000, explaining that if he doesn't pay Carter, it will jeopardize the entire plan. Big Jim responds that he has spent all his money on medical treatment and doesn't have the funds available right now. In a moment of desperation, Jimmy mentions that there's a speaker at their house containing 3 kilograms of narcotics. If he can somehow get access to it, he believes he can arrange the $10,000. A few days later, after searching the house, Jimmy's father tells him that he searched everywhere but couldn't find any drugs. Jimmy then asks if his brother had come over while he was away. Big Jim replies that his brother might have stayed for a night.
Your brother does the same. That's it.
This angers Jimmy, who insists that it must be his brother's doing and demands to know who gave him permission to come over. Frustrated, he storms off. A few days later, Lauren visits Jimmy. She comes in full makeup, trying to make it look like she's his girlfriend. Jimmy tells her that he needs $10,000 or the security guard will ruin his plan. Lauren responds that the FBI is never going to provide that kind of money to complete this mission. She insists that he has to handle this himself, and if it becomes too difficult, they can just end the mission and transfer him back to his old low-security prison. Lauren appears quite demotivated as she realizes she has yet to gather any evidence against Larry. Doubts begin to creep in, and she wonders if Larry might actually be innocent. However, Jimmy firmly states that there's no way Larry is innocent, and he's determined to prove it. He insists that this mission is not just about his freedom but also about the innocent girls whom that ruthless Larry has cruelly murdered. He asks Lauren for more time to work on the case. Jimmy quietly sneaks into Larry's cell while Larry is out. As he looks around, he notices several porn magazines scattered about. Curiously, he opens them and is horrified to discover that Larry has drawn extremely disgusting and horrifying images of girls, depicting strangulation and murder using various instruments, along with sadistic behaviors and rituals. He examines the drawings closely, taking in the unsettling details, and then carefully puts everything back just as he found it, trying to shake off the chilling impact of what he has seen. When Jimmy returns to his cell, he finds Carter waiting for him inside. Carter asks for the money, and Jimmy firmly tells him that he can't arrange it. Carter, with a wicked grin, stares at Jimmy before leaving the cell. For several days, the prison remains eerily quiet. Larry tells Jimmy that this calm is just the calm before the storm, and something big is about to happen. As he predicted, chaos ensues. Psychopathic inmates turn on each other, leading to a brutal outbreak of violence where many inmates and security guards are killed, and bloodshed and destruction reign everywhere. However, Jimmy and Larry stay in their cell, avoiding involvement in the riot and managing to keep themselves safe. The police finally manage to bring the riot under control after a difficult struggle. Following this, Larry is appointed as the cleaning supervisor due to his expertise in cleaning. He enthusiastically guides all the inmates on how to clean, diving into the task with great energy. Watching this, Jimmy realizes that Larry's exceptional cleaning skills are likely what have enabled him to successfully cover up all the evidence against him. While they are cleaning, Jimmy asks Larry about his childhood. Larry reveals that he has been digging graves since he was a kid and has excavated over 100 graves by now. Jimmy, surprised, asks if he wasn't scared as a child to be alone at night with a corpse in a grave. Larry responds nonchalantly, saying there's no need to fear a piece of meat. This confuses Jimmy, who insists that a human is more than just a piece of meat. They are a being that holds a soul. But Larry continues to argue, questioning why people bury valuable watches and rings with the deceased. Those items hold no value for the dead but could be useful to the living. He then recounts a childhood story about the time his father took him to dig up a grave in the middle of the night. Larry dug for hours with his small hands until he finally reached the corpse. They discovered valuable items belonging to the rich deceased person. Larry removed the rings and other valuables one by one, handing them over to his father. However, a precious ring became stuck on the corpse's finger and wouldn't budge. Larry's father then handed him a tool and instructed him to cut off the finger to retrieve the ring. Larry did exactly that, severing the finger and successfully getting the ring. Surprisingly, he felt no remorse for his actions, even as a child, which clearly indicates that he was a psychopath right from the very beginning. This lack of empathy is likely why his father chose Larry for the job instead of his normal brother, Gary. Now, Larry asks Jimmy about his childhood. Jimmy reveals that he felt very lonely growing up. His father, Big Jim, was his only friend, playing with him and spending time together. However, things changed when his mother started a bar business and began dating other men. This created a rift between his parents, and as a result, he became increasingly isolated. Eventually, this led to his parents' divorce, deepening his feelings of loneliness. Jimmy continues his story, explaining that his mother's new boyfriend was very cruel and often abused her. One day, when this man started to attack Jimmy's mother, he tried to intervene to stop him. However, the man retaliated violently and beat Jimmy so badly that he fractured his ribs. Jimmy remembers sitting in another room, in pain, while he could hear his mother being intimate with that man. Larry responds by telling Jimmy that his pain didn't come solely from the fractured ribs but from the realization that he tried to protect his mother, yet she loved that man more than him. This stark contrast deepens Jimmy's feelings of betrayal and loneliness. Jimmy agrees with Larry's observation but becomes uncomfortable when Larry poses a troubling question. If he had the opportunity, would he kill his mother? The question hangs in the air, leaving Jimmy at a loss for words. He senses that Larry's way of thinking is far more aligned with that of a serial killer, revealing a disturbing depth to Larry's character that sends a chill down his spine. A few days later, Jimmy notices that all the inmates are giving him sidelong glances, and it dawns on him that Carter has spread the word about him being an undercover agent. This realization weighs heavily on him. When he visits the psychiatrist's office, he discovers that Dr. Zickerman is on vacation and has been replaced by a new psychiatrist, Dr. Hackett. Jimmy tries to subtly inquire if she is aware of his undercover mission by using code words, but Dr. Hackett responds that she has no idea what he is trying to convey. This interaction confirms Jimmy's fears. He is now completely alone in his mission, with no support or understanding from anyone in the facility. The weight of isolation adds to his sense of urgency and desperation as he grapples with the consequences of Carter's betrayal. A few days later, Jimmy forms a friendship with Gigante, the most influential inmate in the prison. Gigante appreciates Jimmy's attitude and hints that his crew will ensure Jimmy's safety. Meanwhile, Brian and Lauren begin their investigation into the murder of Tricia Reitler, as they have found leads suggesting Larry's involvement in the case. However, they have yet to find Tricia's body, which has not been located ever since the incidents. They visit the last known location where Tricia was seen, and Lauren notices a newly constructed gas station nearby. They go to the gas station and ask an employee if a man named Larry has ever come to fill his van with gas. The employee, being new, admits he doesn't know. Brian then suggests that since there's a gas station here, there should be a mechanic nearby. The employee informs them about a mechanic named John Dickey and shares his location with them.
Thank you.
Brian and Lauren visit John Dickey, who is a cheerful man, comfortably knitting a sweater for his daughter. They show him a picture of Larry and ask if he ever came by for repairs. John responds that he does know Larry, as he used to visit the shop frequently. However, he adds that Larry was quite strange, often staring at the young women who worked at the shop, making them feel uncomfortable and insecure. However, when Larry tried to flirt with John's daughter, Audrey, John banned him from the shop entirely. Lauren asks if they can speak with Audrey for more details. John informs them that Audrey now lives in the city, and they can visit her there to get further confirmation. Brian and Lauren visit Audrey and ask her what she knows about Larry. Audrey shares that Larry was an extremely creepy person who harassed every girl he encountered and even tried to force them into his van. She recalls one disturbing incident where he brought her a bra as a gift, and it was exactly her size, which was clear proof of how unsettling and obsessive he was. Audrey continues, telling Brian and Lauren that Larry once brought her a bicycle as a gift, but she never used it. She then takes them to the garage to show the bicycle. To their shock, Brian and Lauren realize that the bike actually belonged to Jessica Roach, the same girl who had gone missing. It becomes clear that Larry had given Audrey the stolen bike as a gift, further linking him to Jessica's disappearance. Brian and Lauren bring the evidence to Edmund, confident that this could finally be the proof needed to catch Larry. They explain that the stolen bicycle could directly tie Larry to Jessica Roach's disappearance. However, Edmund dismisses their enthusiasm, explaining that after so many years, it's unlikely that any fingerprints would still be on the bike. He adds that while Audrey can testify that Larry gave her the bike, her testimony alone wouldn't be strong enough in court. Despite their determination, Edmund remains firm, telling them that this evidence won't be enough to secure a conviction. He commends them for their hard work and investigation but ultimately says that there's nothing more they can do with what they have. Their only hope remaining is Jimmy in the prison. Meanwhile, Jimmy tries to contact Dr. Zickerman, but the call keeps getting disconnected. Frustrated, he feels the tension building behind him as another inmate, clearly agitated, steps up and almost provokes a fight. Sensing the hostility, Jimmy locks eyes with him for a moment, but instead of escalating the situation, he quietly walks away, leaving the confrontation behind. Later, Jimmy is sitting with Larry, who is carving sculptures of animals and birds out of wood. Larry casually asks him why he was arguing with the other inmates at the phone booth earlier. Jimmy, in a clever move, twists the conversation and says the argument started because the inmate was calling Larry a child diddler. Hearing this, Larry laughs and responds, saying he never forced anyone he had love with them, claiming that everyone has love. After Jimmy's persistent questioning, Larry finally confesses the full story of what happened with Jessica Roach. He explains that Jessica's bike had broken down on the side of the road, and he had been following her. Larry then approached her, offering her a ride in his van. Larry tells Jimmy that Jessica was the only girl who got into his van without hesitation. He describes her as being very nice, but things took a dark turn when he tried to kiss her. Jessica, enraged, fought back, scratching him with her nails. Larry admits that, in that moment, he felt he had no other choice but to render her unconscious using a rag and starter fluid. As Larry continues recounting the events, he explains that the scene kept repeating itself. Jessica would regain consciousness, and he would knock her out again. Jimmy, trying to press for more details, asks what Larry did to her when she was unconscious. Larry, in a detached tone, responds that he doesn't really remember. He says that during the struggle, with all the resistance, he eventually blacked out too. When he woke up, he found both himself and Jessica Roach lying there with their clothes already off. Larry continues his story, revealing that after he woke up, he folded Jessica's clothes and placed her ring on top of them. He then dragged her to a nearby tree, where he tied 2 belts around her neck and strangled her until she died. But even after killing her, Larry wasn't finished. He meticulously cleaned her nails to remove any trace of his DNA and erased all other evidence from her body, ensuring nothing would be left to connect him to the crime. Hearing all this, Jimmy feels overwhelmed with a mix of sorrow and anger, but he can't reveal his emotions in front of Larry. He holds it all inside, struggling to comprehend how someone can be so brutal and heartless. The sheer cruelty of Larry's actions astonishes him, making him question the depths of human sinfulness. Later that night, Jimmy goes back to his cell and starts to cry silently. He can't shake the horrifying thought of how someone as cruel as Larry could murder an innocent girl like Jessica with such brutality. The weight of it all keeps him awake, and he is haunted by nightmares throughout the night. In the morning, Larry comes to wake him up. He tells Jimmy that maybe he's having nightmares because he's scared after hearing the story he shared. He claims that he is just a great storyteller and what he said was merely a story with no connection to reality. Jimmy realizes that Larry is likely to say things like this because he has studied all his case files. Jimmy then uses a new technique and tells Larry that he already knew it was just a story because he believes Larry doesn't have the guts to commit such acts. He calls Larry a coward, which angers him. Larry changes his tone and insists that everything he said is 100% true. He adds that if Jimmy wants to know more, he should come to his office in the basement after lunch. where he will show him the entire map.
I'm telling the truth.
Later, Carter comes to meet Jimmy and says that he knows Jimmy is here to catch Larry. He offers to help Jimmy if he includes him in his plan. Jimmy asks Carter why he wants to help. Carter explains that if he successfully catches a high-profile criminal like Larry, it could lead to a promotion for him. Jimmy firmly tells Carter that he doesn't need his help. He reminds Carter that he has already spread poison about him among the inmates and planted recorders in his clothes and cell. Therefore, it would be better for Carter to stay away from him. On the other side, Lauren and Brian meet Gary. Gary asks them what they are investigating now. Lauren replies that they're not here for an investigation, just to chat for a bit. Gary offers them drinks and mentions that the appeal court will soon accept Larry's appeal, which means Larry will be released. Lauren responds that he's right. Larry will be free again and will start murdering girls once more. Gary gets angry upon hearing this and asserts that while Larry may have done terrible things, he can't possibly be a murderer. He quickly goes inside the house to grab something. Lauren and Brian think he might be retrieving a gun, so they prepare their own weapons by getting their guns ready in their pockets. However, when Gary returns, he brings childhood photos of Larry with him. Seeing this, both of them immediately remove their hands from their guns. Gary shows the pictures and says that Larry has been mentally disturbed since childhood, but he doesn't have the capacity to kill someone. He compares Larry's skills in repairing mechanical parts to that of a magician. However, Lauren, taken aback, asks him about his previous statement that Larry has done some terrible things. Gary responds that everyone makes mistakes, implying that those mistakes don't necessarily equate to murder. However, after repeated insistence from Lauren, Gary finally reveals the details. At one time, he and Larry attended a reenactment event together. Gary had brought a girl to his tent and started to get intimate with her. Seeing this, Larry also attempted to get close to the same girl. Although she wasn't comfortable with Larry, Gary, being drunk, didn't stop his brother. Larry ended up inflicting significant harm on her, beating and strangling her in the process. Gary stood there, watched Larry in shock. Gary states that he had never seen his brother display such a monstrous side before. Larry had turned into a complete demon. The next day, with the help of a biker, Gary managed to take the girl back to her home. Filled with regret, he expresses how he wishes he had used his common sense at that moment to prevent the horrific act from happening. He laments that he should have tried to reason with Larry. Hearing this, Lauren confronts Gary, asking him what he would do if his violent brother were to be released from jail and roam the streets again. She questions whether he would be able to stop him or if he could bear to keep such a monster in his life. Watching him while knowing the potential harm he could cause to someone else's mother or daughter, Gary falls silent, unable to find a response to her probing questions. On the other hand, Jimmy finally heads to the basement to meet Larry. There, Larry has drawn a detailed map showing where he buried the girls he killed. Jimmy notices that there are 21 vulture sculptures placed around the map. He asks Larry why he specifically made 21, pointing out that he could have chosen 20 or 22 instead. Larry brushes off the question, saying that 21 is his lucky number. Curious, Jimmy then inquires about the purpose of the wooden sculptures. Larry explains that these sculptures protect the souls of the dead. From this, Jimmy realizes that Larry has killed 21 girls. Larry folds the map and packs it to send home. Jimmy then asks him if he can sleep at night after doing all this. Larry admits that he often has nightmares. Jimmy suggests that instead of keeping the map, it should be sent to the families of the girls he killed, so their loved ones can find some peace. They should be allowed to bury their daughters in the right place. But Larry just laughs and says that if he does that, he'll get caught. Jimmy suggests that they could arrange for a third party to handle it, but Larry refuses to agree. He insists that soon he will escape from this jail and repeat his actions with other girls. This infuriates Jimmy, and his patience runs out. He suddenly stands up and yells at Larry, declaring that there's no way he's leaving this jail, and that he won't let him get away. At this point, Larry realizes that Jimmy has been sent as an undercover agent by Edmund and Brian. He immediately grabs Jimmy by the throat, shouting at him about betrayal and threatening to kill him, which leads to a serious fight between them.
Fucking monster!
Just then, the guards rush in to break up the altercation. Jimmy finds himself locked back in his cell, while Larry exits his cell, casting an evil smile in Jimmy's direction. As Jimmy contemplates Larry's next move, Dr. Hackett arrives with the guards, issuing an order to place Jimmy in solitary confinement. Jimmy shouts loudly, insisting that he needs to talk to Dr. Zickerman. He repeatedly yells out the landline number, hoping someone will make the call for him, but nobody pays him any attention. Frustration builds as he realizes that his pleas are falling on deaf ears. Jimmy is now locked in solitary confinement, and he makes just one request to the guard. He asks for a pencil so he can draw the map that Larry created before it fades from his memory. When his repeated requests for a pencil are ignored, Jimmy finally resorts to biting his finger to draw the map on the cell walls with his own blood. One by one, all of his fingers get injured, and a lot of blood flows out. Nevertheless, he successfully creates a simple version of the map. After many hours, Dr. Zuckerman finally arrives and orders Jimmy to be taken out of his cell. He explains to Jimmy that he was on vacation, which is why he couldn't come sooner. However, as soon as a security guard informed him that Jimmy was here, he rushed over. He also mentions that he will definitely make sure Dr. Hackett faces consequences for her actions. However, Jimmy is in a very anxious state and keeps insisting on having a pen or pencil so he can draw the map before he forgets it. Eventually, when they reach Dr. Zuckerman's office, Lauren is also present, and Jimmy manages to draw the entire map. He explains that there are 21 marks, all of which are burial sites. He further details how Larry killed Jessica Roach and how he folded her clothes and placed her ring on top of them. After hearing all this evidence, Lauren feels very pleased and congratulates Jimmy for finally showing them the truth. With this evidence, they can easily dismiss Larry's appeal. Jimmy is now taken out of jail and presented in front of the court. The judge, acknowledging his success in the undercover mission and the risks he took to protect the girls in society, pardons all his sentences and grants him the status of a free man. Tears well up in Jimmy's eyes as he realizes he has finally achieved freedom and succeeded in capturing the criminal. Brian meets Jimmy for the first time and thanks him for all the help he provided in the case. Now, Larry's hearing takes place, and this time, the judge completely rejects his appeal because a substantial amount of evidence has come through Jimmy against him. The judge sentences Larry to life in prison with no chance of parole. Larry can't believe his eyes, unable to comprehend how this could happen. After losing the case, Larry attempts to commit the unthinkable in prison, but he is not successful. Gary comes to visit Larry and expresses regret, saying that if only he had treated Larry earlier, perhaps things wouldn't have come to this point. Larry responds by telling Gary not to say such things, insisting that he is innocent and that this jail is not meant for him. Gary counters, stating that Larry belongs in this jail, and that's the real issue. As long as Larry sees himself as a victim, he will never be able to live fully and will continue to attempt the unthinkable. Gary urges him to accept that he is the offender so that he can find peace for the rest of his life in prison. On the other hand, Jimmy finally visits his father as a free man, filled with joy. When Big Jim sees Jimmy, tears of happiness stream down his face. He is overjoyed to witness his son walking freely at last. Sadly, after 5 years, Big Jim passes away from a heart attack. However, the best part is that he spent those precious years with his son, and that's all a father truly wants. Years pass, and Jimmy closes his narcotics business to start a new, legitimate venture, becoming a successful entrepreneur. As he travels in business class, he looks out the window and sees the exact ground